I would like to review the strategies and the segmentation, targeting, and positioning. It is important to understand what are strategies and understand that it's very different than tactics. Tactics are the actions that will eventually culminate to achieve your strategies. So the strategies is a bigger concept. The tactics is a sub-concept of the strategies. The strategies also are divided in two types. There are strategies that are done and conducted for the entire company, and I call these the corporate strategies. And then you have sub-strategies, which are conducted for each one of the product mix, the product, the place, the promotion, and the price. So I will discuss these separately. So first, let's look at the most common strategies which need to fulfill the reasoning behind the objectives. So you have objectives that you want to achieve. Based on these objectives, you will have a set of strategies that are consistent with the objective that you want to fulfill. And then you will have the mix that will have their own strategies with their own objectives. And then you would have the tactics, which will be the many actions that would fulfill the sub-strategies. So it goes from the biggest picture to the smallest detail. So the most famous basic corporate strategies, which are also called the generic marketing strategies, or they are also called the ends-off basic strategies, are market penetration, which means that you're going to be selling the same product to the same people, new product development, which is selling a new product to the same people, market development, which is to sell the same product to new people, and then diversification, which is selling a very different product to a very different group of people. But there are other corporate strategies, which I would say they are not less than the one I just mentioned. It's just that they are not as common. It's push and pull strategies, which is the fact that you will either stimulate the consumption of your products by getting your brand to be known by the consumers, and then the consumers seeking to buy your brand. And so they will look for where is your brand available. And then you have the pull, which is to really stimulate the channel of distribution for them to carry your product and bring it to the customers. Then you have cost leadership, which is to try to have the cheapest product as possible and beat your competitors by having a lower price. Focus and niche strategy, which are about the same, is going for a very sub-segment, so a narrow target. Differentiation is when you try to have a product that is very different, which eventually will get you to also do niche and focus at the same time, because your product will be so different that it will appeal to a very specific group. Then you have the middle of the road strategy, which is real. I didn't make this up. It's the strategy that consists in not in doing something that's universally agreeable and not trying to be anything special. So you would want to be maybe like a Hilton hotel will be within this. Is you're not trying to be too luxurious or too basic or too differentiated. They all look the same and they're all very much acceptable. Operational excellence is when your organization is very well organized to the point that you are have a strategy of being the one that is the most streamlined for the customers, the most convenient, the easiest to find. Customer intimacy is when you develop a strategy which consists in being closer to your customers. They know you well, you know them well, and you learn from each other for the benefit of increasing satisfaction. Product leadership is very focused on the product, in having the most innovative product and the one that is sort of the category prototype. That's expensive, it's hard to keep. It's very ambitious, obviously. Market leadership is try to be the biggest company, the one that is the most sold, that consumers think of first. The market challenger is the company that cannot afford to be a leader and very much try to compete with the number one. And then the market follower, it's a little bit like the middle of the road strategy. It's pretty similar in the sense that you won't try to be too special, focus on something very specific, but you're trying to focus on many things at the same time. And you're not trying to take any strong position from a strategic perspective in order to just not rock the boat and go with the flow. So then you have your mix, the 4 Ps, and each one of these will have their own specific objective. And because you have specific products and price and place and promotion objectives, you will have sub-strategy, which would be consistent with this. So this is a summary of the main strategies. And I think it's very important to know that these are also strategies, but you could have them as the corporate strategies in some very specific cases, but most of the time they would come as strategies under the mix. So working on the specific quality that you're defining for your product mix. When you develop your branding strategy, so there's multiple branding strategies, then you're looking at the product line and creating new products and thinking about having maybe some stretch in your product line, so that is a strategy, and that's more specifically a sub-strategy within your product mix. Then you're going to have more or less services, and then you're going to develop different packaging design that would be more than just a simple action, but more of a strategic positioning, because your packaging may be actually one of your competitive advantage. Then in terms of pricing, there's many pricing sub-strategies, but the two most famous is skimming, trying to sell as expensive as possible, and penetration pricing, which is to try to sell as cheaply as possible. And they both have pros and cons, in the sense that you will get market share faster or not as fast, but then you will have a higher profit, which will allow you to have more space to reduce your prices as your product becomes more within the product life cycle of maturity. If you start really low, when you get to the maturity stage, you may have no more space to reduce your prices as much as some business that could have started with skimming. And then you have other elements of pricing strategies, such as captive strategy pricing, is trying to sell, make money more on the accessories that you're selling with the product. And then you have bundling pricing, where you're selling a combination of products for less than the price of all the product added price together. In places mix, you have sub-strategies, which is either to sell directly to the consumer or to use intermediaries, so it's direct versus indirect. And then you have issues related to the number of channels of distribution you're going to use. The more distribution channels, you will be intensive distribution strategy versus having maybe 50% of the distribution potential will be selective, and then exclusive will be selling to just one very specific distributor within an area. And then hybrid distribution is when you have the possibility of working with having direct and indirect combination, and trying to really maximize the potential of reaching the customers and the different objectives that you may have in doing this. But hybrid has some issues, so you have to be very careful in not becoming a competitor to your own distributors by distributing yourself. And then finally, you have the promotion, which is the mix that has to do with communication. And that situation, it's the same thing, is how many communication channels you're going to use, one or multiple multi-channels, using social media, with social media, having a sales force, and thinking in terms of incentivizing people for buying your product, and when do you do it, and how often you incentivize, and how big is your discount, because having a big discount can be also a problem, in the sense that people don't see your price as being real. They see the discount price as being the real discount price. If you do it too often, selling by communicating directly to the customers, offering maybe some catalogs or newsletter, or having a club where people are getting information before everyone else. So all of these sub-strategies have a broad impact, and eventually they have to be implemented by some actions and small details. And so all the small details are not the strategies, but all the small details are therefore tactics. Now, talking about S, T, and P, it's important to understand that S is before T all the time, and then positioning can be either the last or the first. Being the first is the most common. However, being P positioning being first is not as effective, because you are not thinking about the market, you're thinking about what the company wants to do. So a successful business is a business that think about what do the customer want, and then offer people what they want. So STP is much more effective. Segmenting is about dividing the market and looking for characteristics that are efficient in dividing the market. Targeting is really focusing on which group of customers are the best. And then positioning is coming up with a meaning, an image, a reputation for your company that is consistent with the type of customers and what the customers want your reputation to be. So when you are targeting, you have three methods. Oftentimes they are called three strategies, but I think it's confusing to talk about the three targeting strategies. So I call them methods. The one that works less and less is the first method, which is called undifferentiated. It's trying to sell your product to everyone. So you don't have a specific target. You may do a STP and realize that there's not too many differences between the targets, and therefore you go after all of them. This is less common. There's more and more competition, and therefore that's not the one that will happen very often for any one of us. Then the next two, which are called concentrated or differentiated, are the most common. However, I give them a different name because most students are confused and most people are confused. So the combined is the concentrated, which means that you're going after few targets, versus the centered is the differentiated, which means that you're going after one target. So if you see similarities between targets, you're going to concentrate by picking this combination of targets. That's why I call it combined, in order to sell a product to them. There's not too many differences between men and women when they are young. There's a lot of differences when they are older. So therefore, we're going to focus on the young, and therefore we're going to have two targets, and we're going to use concentrated targeting strategy by having men and women between 20 and 25. Centered is suddenly you saying, no, there's too many differences between these people, and we don't have as much resources as a larger company. So we're going to be very, very centered, and we're going to focus on just one single target, and that would be the differentiated, otherwise the one that I call centered.